So the date is June 8th, 2019. You're watching UFC 238. You're on the main card of the pay-per-view, and the feature fight just goes down between Tony Ferguson and Donald Cowboy Cerrone. They have a back and forth fight. Cowboy takes the first round. Tony starts to take over in the second. Tony accidentally punches Cowboy after the bell, and then he goes and blows his nose out. And the fight's ruled a doctor stoppage. Little did we know at that time, thinking, oh, Tony Ferguson's going to be fighting Habib. But little did we know that'd be the last time Tony Ferguson was to win. That was the 12th fight of his 12 fight winning streak. And after that, he'd go on to lose 7 fights in a row. So, how exactly did this happen? So, Tony Ferguson was scheduled against Habib Nurmagomedov 4 times. It seemed like the only purpose he had in his career was to fight Habib. There was the whole talking point that that was his nightmare matchup, that Tony was going to be the one to take the O, and we never got to see the fight, so it's hard to say what would have happened. Obviously, people are going to say Tony would have lost, but that this isn't the same Tony. Obviously, Tony has changed, and there's many factors on what you can say made this change in Tony Ferguson happen. So I'm just going to look at all the different ways Tony Ferguson could have affected Tony Ferguson. So you look at Tony Ferguson, he was scheduled against Habib Nurmagomedov for the first time, but he tore his fibular collateral ligament while walking on a set for a pre-fight media obligation and was forced to withdraw from the event. He tripped over cords and tore his fibula. So, that was just a horrible injury. That was in April of 2018 it happened. He came back in October of that same year and fought Anthony Pettis. And at the time, people didn't really speak about this, but if you do watch that fight, Tony Ferguson was already slowing down at that point. He looked completely different from the Rafael dos Anjos, Kevin Lee version of Tony Ferguson. He wasn't the same fighter at that point, in my opinion. Like, you just see the way he was moving. He got caught in that fight, but Tony gets caught in every fight, especially at that point. Weirdly enough, he gets caught. He used to get caught and dropped a lot more in his previous fights than he did when he was on this current losing streak, which is interesting to look at. But it looked like that injury was one of the catalysts for Tony Ferguson's downfall. Uh, just the way he rushed his comeback was not smart. It's the Tony Ferguson thing to do. But I think this was the end of El Kukui, not just the end of Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson continued to fight, but El Kukui, the mythical being, Tony Ferguson, the boogeyman, he was gone. Even the Donald Cerrone fight, losing the first round to Donald Cerrone is never a good look. Donald Cerrone is known for being a slow starter, one of the most notorious slow starters in the sport of MMA. He almost never takes a first round, and for him to actually come out there, be more aggressive and win the first round against Tony Ferguson was a pretty bad look. Uh, it's just there's multiple factors. There was Justin Gaethje. It was booked against Justin Gaethje for April 9th, I believe it was, or maybe it was May 1st. So it was originally planned to take place on April 18th. So on April 18th, or April 17th it should be, Tony Ferguson weighed in for a fight that had been previously cancelled. He'd done a whole weight cut, made 155. I don't know why he did this. Really, he wasn't. a smart thing to do. It was a Tony Ferguson thing to do, but he goes in there, he cuts weight for a fight that's not even happening, and he says, "I hope." He tells Justin Gaethje, "I hope you're going to be cutting weight too. This is just showing my champ shit only mindset." And he weighs in. He goes in, weighs 155. Tony Ferguson's a big guy. If you look at him, he's not like a small lightweight, especially at this point. He's still, he's a very athletic guy, like a tall, lightweight, has a long reach. Like the guy's a big guy. So even, instead of letting yourself recover, he goes there, has a really no non, like really just so stupid. Just goes and cuts weight an extra time. I mean, this is a Tony Ferguson thing to do. Tony Ferguson, the type of guy to go in there, cut weight for no reason for a fight that's not even happening. He does that and then gets rebooked against Justin Gaethje for May 9th. Goes in there, makes 155 on the dot again, and he fights for the interim UFC lightweight championship against Justin Gaethje. And a lot of people point to this fight and maybe the weight cut being the catalyst for his downfall, sorry. But I can see why. If you look at it, Tony Ferguson goes in there against Justin Gaethje. He gets absolutely pummeled from pillar to post. Uh, Gets his face caved in, literally overhand after overhand on Tony Ferguson's chin. He takes every bomb Justin Gaethje throws at him. He gets beat down severely for 5 rounds. He has his moments in this fight. Don't get me wrong. He drops Justin Gaethje with an uppercut, and you start to think, wow, maybe Tony Ferguson's going to turn this one around. But then he just proceeds to get beat up badly and badly, overhand on the chin, overhand on the chin, overhand on the chin. He had looked like he had been through a horror movie by the end of this fight because he had taken so many overhands. He had got, he had had his face caved in so much. By the end of the fight, he had taken so much damage, he literally had to shake off the damage. He was shaking his head from all the trauma that Justin Gaethje had given to him. In that fight, Tony Ferguson, in his career has never been the most defensively sound guy, and that may be another reason this ended up biting him in the ass. But in this fight against Justin Gaethje, he ate 143 significant strikes, a lot of them just head strikes, big overhands, just right on the chin of Tony Ferguson. He he took a career-altering beating here. This is like a beating most men wouldn't be able to come back from. Not even Tony Ferguson. He goes in there, he gets absolutely pummeled from pillar to post. And, some people were calling for his retirement because it was such a bad beating. But like they say about Tony Ferguson, the type of guy, he came back months later, 7 months in fact, and fought Charles Oliveira. And, a lot of people were picking Tony Ferguson to win this fight, even after all the damage he took. And Charles Oliveira went in there, slammed him, took him down, repeatedly took him down. At one point, had him in an armbar with about 15 seconds to go, where he almost snapped Tony Ferguson's arm. And Tony Ferguson, being so tough, just toughed it out, didn't tap. Then in the next fight against Beneil Dariush, he goes in there, gets taken down, gets beat up on the ground, gets put in a knee bar where he doesn't tap, almost has his knee torn apart. Shows insane toughness again there. And the thing with all these performances, he's starting to slow down and slow down. Then Michael Chandler, the old Tony Ferguson shows up in this fight. Briefly, he drops Michael Chandler. He's having some success. This is the best he's looked in a while. And then he gets front kick KO'd by Michael Chandler, which this might be the worst thing that happened to him because he hasn't looked worse since this fight. After this fight, he's looked even worse than he was previously. The front kick KO, knocked out cold, the first time he's been knocked out cold in a fight. And then against Nate Diaz, originally scheduled against the Leech, Li Jingliang. Also got to add, literally 4 months apart from getting KO'd, he comes back, fights Nate Diaz, They look very geriatric and old in this fight. All respect to them, legends of the game, but it's just not a good look for either of these men in this fight. And Tony Ferguson shoots for a takedown, gets guillotined by Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz goes out on a win on his UFC career. And then Tony Ferguson takes almost a year off, comes back against Bobby Green, gets pieced up against Bobby Green, but he does knock Bobby Green off balance a couple times in this fight, but he's obviously slowed down, gets beat up, and then gets subbed by Bobby Green, who has had a submission for almost 10 years or something around that, over 10 years at that point. And then of course yesterday Paddy Pimblett gets the win over Tony Ferguson. So when you look at all these fights, you're probably thinking that Justin Gaethje is the catalyst for all of this, and I do think it does play a part on why he has fell down so quickly. But I think there is just a big reason people aren't realizing why Tony Ferguson had this downfall, and it has to do with something we're all going to face one day. And I just think it wasn't the injuries. Well, obviously, I think the injuries had something to do with it. Don't get me wrong. I think all of these factors have something to do with it, but I think it's the biggest factor that comes into all of this is Father Time has just got to Tony Ferguson. If you look at Tony Ferguson's style, he was never a technical fighter. Tony Ferguson was never a technical boxer, a technical kickboxer. He was never a, he had a grappling game and everything, but his overall jiu-jitsu was never, it was more of a unorthodox type of jiu-jitsu. He didn't have an unorthodox jiu-jitsu game, if you will. Like, he would go with the rubber guards. He trains in 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, which is a bit different to normal jiu-jitsu. It's about more unorthodox styles of attacks. And he was just pure athleticism. Tony Ferguson was not winning fights because of his great technical game or anything like that. It was all to do with his athleticism, his long reach. He could take the damage. Toughness was what he was winning. He didn't have defense. He just had crazy pressure, taking a shot to give a shot. Taking shots to slow you down, gassing people out, fighting at a high pace, eating every shot he can take. That was his whole game plan. That was everything he'd done in his fights to get these wins. It wasn't because Tony Ferguson, when you go back and you rewatch the El Kukui days, and I like to distinguish between El Kukui, which was the 12 fight winning streak, or even the 12 fight winning streak. I think El Kukui did show up against Justin Gaethje. I think Justin Gaethje all round is always going to be a bad matchup for Tony Ferguson. But obviously, I think after that, El Kukui died, and it was just Anthony Padilla or Tony Ferguson, whatever you want to call him, who showed up for those other fights. Because there's just a big difference, and I really truly believe Father Time just came. Like Tony Ferguson, people don't realize Tony Ferguson was 36 years old by the time he fought Justin Gaethje. Most people leave their prime at 35, especially in those lower weight classes. It's a lot harder to keep up. He's 39 now. He's going to be 40 soon. He's not a young man by any means. And you could already see he was falling off when he did fight Anthony Pettis and Donald Cerrone. Obviously, that tripping over the cords was a bad point in his career, having to go through those injuries at that age of your career, the inactivity as well. Fought Donald Cerrone in June of 2019, then comes back 11 months later against Justin Gaethje. He had a lot of problems with inactivity at that time. So many injuries. He was injury prone. He got older. He did the double weight cut. He took so much damage against Justin Gaethje. His style of fighting. There was just so many things that factor into this. It's not a case of what went wrong with Tony Ferguson. It was just he was a ticking time bomb. There were just so many things that have gone wrong with Tony Ferguson. It was more a question of when is this all going to affect Tony Ferguson? And we all found that this all just affected Tony Ferguson at one big go. And now this is what we have now. This is the current Tony Ferguson we have. He had a great career when he was fighting in his prime, even post prime, which I think a lot of his career, many people realize, he was probably post prime for the Kevin Lee fight, the Pettis fight, the Cerrone fight. So he still had some wins when he was past his prime, but obviously It's hard to know exactly when, but obviously we all know Tony Ferguson's done. It's unfortunate. I'm a big Tony Ferguson fan, especially I'm glad I got to watch him win his last fight against Donald Cerrone. It was good to see that, like, it was just good to see him win, not knowing what we had at the time, thinking, wow, 25 and 3, like what a legend, Tony Ferguson. And still is a legend, don't get me wrong. He's never going to lose legend status. He was UFC interim champion, had so many fights, main evented pay-per-views. But what I mean by this is, I just didn't think that the downfall was coming after that Cerrone fight. Obviously, I could see he'd slowed down a bit, but I don't think anyone expected him to go, on a 7 fight losing streak afterwards. That is just something that was really unexpected, but that's what's happened. And I think we all just got to pour one out to the legend that Vel Kukui, the man that Tony Ferguson once was. Not looking at this part of his career, this slide on his career. We just need to remember the legend that was Tony Ferguson. But anyway, thank you for watching this video. Make sure you give this video a like. Let me know your thoughts on what caused the downfall of Tony Ferguson. Do you agree with my points? Do you not? Let me know in the comments below. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you subscribe. Leave a like because I'd really appreciate it. If you could share this video, I would also appreciate that too. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure you subscribe and yeah, peace. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it.